Psakim. I'm going to read the last Mishnah of Psakim. HaPesach, Asar Chatzot Metameh Te'edayim, HaPigu Ve'Letar Metanim Ve'Kayim. So the Pesach offering contaminates one's hand, and after midnight, after Chatzot, because after Chatzot you're no longer allowed to Pesach, so therefore it's Metameh Yadayim. And the sin also, and Pigu and Notar, they are also Metameh Yadayim. Then the Mishnah goes on to Machloket about what bracha do you make. Berach HaPesach Patar et Shel Zevach. Berach et Shel Zevach Lo Patar et Shel Pesach Iber HaMishmal. HaMishmal says that if someone makes a bracha on the Korban Pesach, that would also be quoted in the Zevach that was brought along with it. But if you were to make a bracha al Zevach on the Zevach that he brought, and then afterwards, then that would not fulfill the bracha on the Korban Pesach, and you would then have to say the bracha on the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Akiva Omer, lo so poteret zo, lo so poteret zo. No matter what, even if you said the Birkat HaZevach before even if you made the Birkat HaPesach before the Birkat HaZevach, you would still need to make a separate bracha on the Birkat HaZevach. Something Masechet Psakim, really the hard here and today, Kaddish for few Mishnayos. Adjana Masechet Kamani, Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Adjana Masechet Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Adjana Vodi Shemila Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Vodi Shemila, Vodi Vodi Adjana Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Adjana Salam, Daitan Allah, Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Daitan Allah, Vodi Shemila, Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Vodi Shemila, Vodi Adjana Adjana Allah, Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Adjana Allah, Daitan Allah, Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Daitan Allah, Shisha Sidi Mishnah, Vodi Shemila, Vodi Adjana Rizal Benecha, Nailin, Vodi Shedek, Tortal, Vodi Vodi with the A, Manu, Salina, Rakapa, Rami, Rakapa, Rakapa, Asai Rakapa, Rakari, Rakapa, Rakapa, Raki, Rakapa, Surfa, Rakapa, the Barakapa, Rakapa, Darakapa, Arab, Na, the way the director of Habit, this family, Turan, and nothing, it's a different sense, it's a Habit, it's all going to be so they can finish from America, it's a different kilometer, Yili, Hamid, Tefa, the land of the bush, the land of the Shkaf, people, Kibanti, Hamid, Burka, Amen, Amen, Selava, Modiva, Mantua, Vanessa, and I, the way of finish, Santa, so he didn't get a shake of reduction, the other Santa, so he didn't go take care of the China, must give me, great around, they must be very big. They leave, I know they leave, they want to leave, I don't leave. Come start, they want to leave, they don't come and start. I don't see them, I see them, I don't see them out of the thought. They ever see their shakers, they never thought they'll leave. You're going to your shakers, or check on you, you're all going to see you there. But it's the class, you're not by that. I know, like, Shemsha, Zepani, the Zayad, Shisha, Sidi Mishnah, Keta, Zayad, the Center, the Swag, the Free, the Center, the Gold, the Ben, the Shmul, the Center, the Kaina, all the Red, the Tordeka, the Allah. The school thought that I commemorated the Pandya, the Miga, but the was a rich, look at Mush, the Zorbi, he's a rich. This was a real long, the MP, the Lecha, and the Delta, the Shelby, Mishma Lecha, but the Zeta, the Sierra, the Video, the Lecha, the National, the Everything, the Glass, Mela, Ocean, the Bird, and I was a Gas, and I ran, and the Hotel Show.
Amen. Amen.
I would now we're going to hear from Kurtz. Thank you very much, Hami and Nishmat Yitz for joining us. We're going to now hear from Kurtz. Please give your utmost attention.
Thank you all so much for coming here and listening. I know that there are a few familiar faces in the crowd. It wasn't so long ago that I was a student here in Or Chaim. I know that it takes a lot of dedication to come here during your lunch, and that means a lot. Thank you so much. I won't take up too much time, but I hope I'll share a couple anecdotes, a couple stories that I hope can possibly be as a source of inspiration to the students here, because my father certainly was that, at least for me and for all those who knew him. Just to give you a little bit of background, my family goes back in Toronto since the 1800s. My father was a fourth-generation Torontonian. I went to Or Chaim. When he was in Or Chaim, from the young age, I mean, not much younger than yourselves, at least some of you, at the age of 12, 13, 14 years old, he already started having a certain appreciation for Torah that at the time and amongst his peers was certainly profound and unheard of. He was sitting and learning in the base medrash when his friends were running around playing. He found that to be where he really got his happiness, where he really got his that's what he really enjoyed to do. He loved to do it. When he was graduating Or Chaim, when he was graduating Or Chaim, his Rebbeim told him, I don't know where you're planning to go next year. You might be planning, to go to this school, that school. We really think you should go somewhere and just sit and learn. Go to Ner Yisrael, and we want you to sit and learn, because your mind, you have to sit, you have to learn, and that's what you have to do. You have to become a Rosh Yeshiva. And my father and his parents steadfastly and in a strong way said, no, we're going to Or Chaim. My father's picture, he used to be on the wall here. I was one of the first graduating classes of Or Chaim. I think he was the fourth graduating class of Or Chaim at the young school at the time. While my father was in Or Chaim, he grew to the height of 6'6". I think when he was in grade 9, he was 6'6". And his friends were all coming up to him all the time and saying, oh, come play basketball. But they related to me, throughout his whole life, they would always tell me, he would say, no, I want to sit and learn. And he would sit in the base medrash and he would learn. And it sounds like a concept very foreign, to all of us here, because when I was in Or Chaim, that certainly wasn't on the top of my mind or any of my peers' mind, but he sat and he learned. His Rosh Yeshiva at the time saw something special in him. They developed a very close bond, and throughout his high school years, he really started to become a real masmid, a real Talmud Chacham. When he was graduating Or Chaim, his Rosh Yeshiva said, I want you to go to Gush, to the top shiur at Gush at the time was Rav Lichtenstein. Any American student at the time, it wasn't very typical for them to go in, but he saw that my father had a special gift for learning, a special intellectual gift, and my father went into that class. He went into Rav Lichtenstein's shiur for 2 years. Towards the end of his 2 years, Rav Lichtenstein called in my grandparents and said, I don't know what your plans are for him, but he has to go to YU and he has to sit and learn. No question about it, he has to be Rosh Yeshiva. We need him to sit and learn. And my father and his parents said, no, we want him to go to U of T. He's going to become an engineer. And Rav Lichtenstein said, no, if he goes back to U of T, he's never going to sit and learn. He's never going to really develop his skills as a Talmud Chacham. And my father said, you know what, it's important to me to get an education, and I have to make a parnasa, and I'm going to go back to U of T. My father came back to U of T, and anyone who's familiar with the engineering program, my father became a biomedical engineer, knows that it's probably the toughest program, U of T engineering, that you could go into. While my father was in U of T, he sat with his Charusa every night, and they learned for between 5 and 6 hours a night, till usually between 12 and 1 in the morning, after a whole day of classes, and then they would go back to class the next day. This was 7 days a week. He sat with his Charusa, learned about 5 to 6 hours a day. Now, I tell you this not to try to impress you with the amount of time that he learned. My father, in a professional level, I'll share one quick story about the type of work that he did throughout his life. When he was working at the time with children who had an amputated limb, so children who had lost a leg or an arm, and fitting them with prosthetic limbs. He was doing work with muscle movement and muscle sensory movement, and someone approached him and said, "My husband has Lou Gehrig's disease." Anyone who's, I'm sure you're all familiar with ALS after the Ice Bucket Challenge this summer. Anyone who's familiar, when you have Lou Gehrig's disease or ALS, you slowly lose control of all the muscles in your body, one after another, until you get to a point like Stephen Hawking, as I'm sure you're all familiar with him, today has control of one muscle in his body, just about one muscle in his body. Everything else he is paralyzed. When you have this disease, your brain works at 100%. You can think to 100% capacity, but you can't move a muscle in your body. It's a terrible disease. And this woman came up to my father and said, "My husband has this disease. Do you think there's anything you can do to help him?" So my father went and met him. And when they met, my father unfortunately wasn't able to help him out in the capacity of work, but he said, "You know what? Your husband was a real inspiration to me. I'm going to see what I can do to help him." At the time, they would ask him this man questions. He had been a judge in Canada for about 20, 30 years at the time. And they asked my father if he could help. At the time, they would ask him questions. Do you need, is there anything you need? Blink once for yes, twice for no. My father designed a system that hooked up to one muscle in his cheek. He had controlled one muscle in his cheek, and through that he was able to talk through Morse code, and he served as a judge after that for 20 years approximately. After that, just through that one muscle in his body, he was able to communicate. I would walk into the house, and in the Stephen Hawking computer voice, he would greet me, say, "Hi Yosef, how are you?" And it was kind of surreal that this man who had lost everything in his life, and then my father was able to help him. His whole career, his whole life was dedicated to helping people, and he achieved tremendous professional accolades. But I'll tell you, what I saw from him is every night he would come home and he would work very, very hard. He would come home and he would sit and learn. You think about how tough our lives are sometimes, but no matter what was going on in his life, when he wanted his solitude, he would go and sit and learn. I remember a story, I don't know exactly where the origins are from, but I remember hearing it in the name of the Brisker Rav, but I'm sure it's told in the name of many different people. That someone once came to the Brisker Rav and said, he was a rabbi, and he said to the Brisker Rav, "How is it possible that all my children are going off the derech? They're all going and becoming businessmen, and they don't want anything to do with Torah. And there's a guy down the street who's a businessman, and all his kids are sitting and learning Torah. They're all sitting in yeshiva. How's that possible?" So the Brisker Rav said to him, "There's a big distinction between your life and his. You go out and you're a Rav and you teach Torah, but when you come home at night, you're complaining about how am I going to pay this bill, how am I going to pay that bill, I don't know what to do, my life is so hard." And what your kids see is that what you care most about is the finances. That businessman, when he comes home at night, he's sitting and learning. And what his kids see is that Torah to him is the most important thing. And that's really the essence of what I learned growing up with my father, that no matter what else was going on in his life, Torah was always the most important thing. A little bit about the other things that he did. I think that served as a source of inspiration to me. Very often in our lives, I know at least when I was in high school, it's very easy to look for excuses not to do mitzvahs, not to do the right thing. My father in his life always looked for the excuses to do the mitzvahs, no matter what it was, and there was no task that was too small for him. But to the point that 2.5 years when he got sick, he had a surgery it was a 12-hour surgery to remove his tumor, and it was a very intense surgery. He was in very bad shape afterwards. It was all day, finished late at night, and they kicked us out of the hospital that night because he wasn't doing well. I went to go visit him the next morning, early in the morning, and I saw that he was very weak. He had very little energy left, And with his last bit of energy, he called me over and he said, "Can you look at my tefillin? I want you to help me put on tefillin because I don't have the strength to do it on my own." Think about it in our life. You're off on a Sunday. I know you didn't have school yesterday, so you're off on a Sunday. How easy it is to be lazy, to not want to go to davening, to put on tefillin. But every morning, no matter what was going on in my father's life, the alarm clock would go off at 5:45 in the morning. He'd be up in the base manager's learning, and then he'd go to shul first thing in the morning, come home, he'd sit and learn, he'd go work very hard, he'd come home and he'd sit and learn. And that to me served as an incredible source of inspiration. His hachnasas Or Chaim, his gemilas chasadim were out of this world. I mean, you would be amazed to hear the type of stuff he did. If someone comes, knocks at your door, and he's, a homeless person, someone who maybe smells bad, someone who maybe doesn't have the best appearance, and maybe you give him $1, maybe you tell him to go away. My father would greet him, welcome him in, even to the point that someone once came to our house, he didn't have all his mental faculties and he wasn't able to clean himself, and to the point that my father helped him clean himself, and my father helped him take a shower and helped him with everything, just to the point that there's no task too small, there's no task too disgusting. When you have to help someone, you do it, and that's who my father was. What his connection was with Or Chaim after he finished yeshiva, he was back here when he was about 20 years old. He joined the board of Or Chaim, and for the most part, for 32 straight years, served either on the board of Or Chaim or on the chinuch committee of Or Chaim, as the president, as the chairman of the board, as the secretary, in every capacity that's imaginable. From the moment that he was able to. He had a mission, and some of you might groan if you heard what his mission was, but he had a mission to make sure that every student in Or Chaim appreciated Talmud Torah. Every student appreciated the fact that this was a yeshiva. He was pushing for something that, if I was in high school, I would have been so mad that on exam days that you have proper shir and proper seder and proper learning. Every Sunday, whenever there was a Sunday that we were off, he would want us to be in shir and seder. He would have us come to the base medrash to learn. And when I was in high school, I used to love not having school on Sunday and love not having class during exams. But he really felt that when you go to a yeshiva, when you're trying to become a ben Torah, when you're trying to become a Talmud Chacham, these are the steps you have to take. That's all I'll say for now. Thank you all so much for listening and for your attention. And his neshama shabbat aliyah mach Hashem diu me'al kol